What a mess, and that is really the simplest way to describe everything that we're about to go over within this video. Now, if you have not been following along, there's been criticism, controversy blowing up over Cyberpunk 2077 due to this report coming from Bloomberg's Jason Schreier, in which the headline is, Cyberpunk 2077 publisher orders 6-day weeks ahead of launch, and there's really been a divisive opinion on this piece, with some saying it's unacceptable that CDPR is making developers work an extra day, ordering mandatory crunch, while others don't see a big deal. Personally, myself, I think that these situations often are blown out to be that they're black and white, but in reality, this is a very gray situation, and based on some new reporting from GameInformer that we're about to go over, kind of seems like my suspicions have been confirmed. But like I said at the beginning, this is just a giant mess, and the topic of crunch with Cyberpunk 2077 has been a huge topic for years. In 2017, CDPR took a very hard stance, saying pretty much this is who we are, and if you're not down for it, then you can leave. In 2019, CDPR seemingly shifted gears, telling Kotaku in an interview that they wanted to treat developers more humane and they were implementing new policies to lessen crunch, but they also held back a little bit, saying that there could be some crunch during the final stages of development. That was said in May of 2019, but a month later at E3, Marcin Owinski, the company's founder, pretty much said that there's just not going to be crunch at all. And that's what really got CDPR in trouble as of late with the recent reports, based on what Bloomberg wrote in their piece. But fast forward to the early part of 2020, the company's CEO, Adam Kaczynski, again confirmed that yes, there was unfortunately going to be some Cyberpunk 2077 crunch for developers to get the game out on time. Now, there's obviously lots of other parts of this, like the pandemic, which kind of blew up everything for this entire gaming industry, and then there's also Polish labor laws, which makes this a lot more different, and I would say complicated, because you have to factor in that CDPR has developers all around the world working on the game, and then there's also contractors, which laws are very different with how contractors are treated. Again, a big point that I actually made in my last video on this subject, which is a lot more in-depth, and I highly recommend that you check it out. There's just lots of intricacies to this situation, and it's very nuanced. Like, it's just not as straightforward as some believe it to be, and you can't just bring up a Polish labor law article and say this is how it is, because we obviously don't know CDPR contracts. But regardless of that, we're actually hearing from some CD Projekt Red developers that are disputing somewhat some of the reporting. Now, we have this first article coming from WCCF Tech. This is some of what I went over in my last video, but there is more that was stated. Fellow Polish developer Adrian Chmielewicz, founder of People Can Fly, as well as his current studio The Astronauts, wrote a lengthy Facebook post this Sunday to opine that crunch isn't always cynical and the whole situation is a lot less black and white than some would like to believe, as I stated before. And the lead technical designer at CDPR quickly responded to the post to say that indeed, managers of game studios are not the proverbial capitalist exploiters. I can only confirm what Adrian wrote. Even if it comes to the situations he describes, my experience shows that game developers have relative solidarity in this respect from top to bottom, regardless of the position taken. I must disappoint you. Game development managers are not the proverbial capitalist exploiters who count money while smoking a cigar and from time to time glance at the oppressed developers. And then it continues, when a user seemed ironically skeptical of this claim in his Facebook reply to the aforementioned post, the CDPR developer retorted that this practice has been going on for a long time and wondered whether some people just enjoy the image of CDPR as one of the bad guys. I wonder what makes funny in your statement. CDPR shares profits for a long time on time and with no excuses. Maybe it was laughter through tears. Seriously, I have the impression that some people preferred us to be the bad just to have a foundation for their ideological narrative, and yeah, that actually is very much true. This goes back years ago. There's just been so much controversy with Cyberpunk 2077 and CDPR, and there's just so much drama that was blown out of proportions, whether that be some stupid joke tweets that people blew up, and just lots of other stuff. There's just so much controversy with this game, and again, something that I mentioned in my last video was it's partially attributed to the fact that CDPR so openly do so many interviews about their games, which is different than most companies like Rockstar Games, which don't really talk at all about the games that they're working on until the finish line. which actually I think is beneficial and maybe something that a lot of other companies consider doing in the future just to circumvent what's happening here now with Cyberpunk. Anyway, that was the opinion and a very public statement coming from a CD Projekt Red developer on the subject of crunch in this video game industry. But here's the interesting thing. We actually now have a new report coming from GameInformer who cites CD Projekt Red developers as sources, pretty much conflicting or disputing with what Bloomberg's Jason Schreier is reporting. And right now this is blowing up all over social media, and the reactions have been, well, it again has been very divisive, with some defending CD Projekt Red, saying again that this is just confirmation that this whole situation has been blown out of proportion, while others are saying no, this is just downplaying crunch and the problem that this video game industry faces. But here is what Liana Rupert of GameInformer reports.
This one's a little bit trickier because I've been covering crunch in this industry for a long time, and I feel like there's a really important difference though with CD Projekt Red. One, the compensation is above and beyond what they're already getting. Two, it's a short term before launch, and from what I understand from talking to a few people there was a discussion on, do we want to delay the game again, or do we want to do this? And from what I heard, it was a mass majority saying that they agreed to the 6-day work week.
So what's really interesting about the beginning of this clip, and there is more to it, CD Projekt Red apparently considered delaying the game again, but the mass majority of developers supported working an extra day for 6 weeks to get the game out. That's what's alleged in this, and she is citing CD Projekt Red sources. Jason Schreier actually did respond to this point on Twitter saying, "I have not asked anyone about this specifically, but I've never heard of a company pulling all of its workers to ask whether they should delay the game again. That doesn't really happen." And then he furthermore said, "To be clear, I have not asked anyone about this specific question because I saw this morning and I'm off today." So he'll probably get back to his sources and confirm, or yeah, I guess give an opinion on that at a later date. But right now, what is clear is that this situation is complex, and it's becoming more clear that, surprise, surprise, many developers in CD Projekt Red have differing opinions about how the company is going about this. Obviously, some reached out to Jason Schreier for a reason, and others reached out to GameInformer's Liana, giving a differing account.
I will never advocate for crunch, but also the Polish working system and cultural attitudes towards employment and production is very different than how it is here. And again, not advocating for it, but the attitude in Polish development, even though the game development over there is still relatively small, it's very different from the work-to-workday basis. And in terms of crunch, everyone I've talked to that's over there has not seen it as a crunch.
So I think actually one great point that Liana makes here is that CD Projekt Red is a Polish developer, not a United States developer, and these are different cultures, different backgrounds. People view work differently over there compared to here, and the crunch stories are drastically different, and in some of the reporting, not necessarily from Bloomberg, but IGN, GameSpot, and such, you don't really hear about that. You don't really get that insight into that, and yeah, I do think that that is an important detail that probably should be mentioned to understand the differing perspective on crunch in this gaming industry, because definitely there are many developers that are okay with putting in extra hours for a project that they consider passionate about.
It wasn't just a random drop of this is now mandatory. From what I understand is there was a discussion beforehand about weighing the different options. Did I talk to every single person at CD Projekt Red? No. But there's another important part of this that I really feel like doesn't get addressed, and especially with a lot of those like kind of not clickbait, but like deliberately inflammatory headlines, is that it's a complicated issue. And the fact that the day that they went gold, the conversation came back in flux. And I've talked to a couple of the devs that said they were like so excited to share people the news that it was gold. And one person directly told me, she was like, "I'm almost scared to sound proud of what we did."
Liana is again not wrong. I have seen some CD Projekt Red developers legitimately disappointed by the outrage that has been sparked by the recent controversy over crunch with Cyberpunk 2077, in which, yeah, there are some people saying that they're just going to boycott the game now. But the problem with that is also just not considering the fact that this is an industry-wide problem. And this is a problem that goes beyond video games into this whole tech industry. No matter what, with all the excuses that some people give to this culture, it's no matter what a bad thing because of the fact that there's just so many developers being burnt out and leaving this industry behind. Many of the games that you love, a lot of these developers have now left this industry because they just can't handle the overwork, and they wanted to find something that's a little bit, I guess, mentally and physically less demanding. And yes, I understand that every single industry has problems with overworking, but specifically with video games as tech industry, it's really a significant issue that gets downplayed by so many. But in the context of Cyberpunk 2077 right now, with how it's blowing up with all of the outrage, it does definitely seem like it's being blown out of proportions with a lot of context missing, like the fact that CDPR has been proactive with trying to improve. And now we have conflicting reports from both Jason Schreier and now GameInformer, which has, I guess, seemingly developers within CD Projekt Red with conflicting opinions about what's happening right now. Anyway, we're now going to move to the final clip from this GameInformer podcast that I do want to share, in which GameInformer's Liana, I think she makes a very good point about some of the headlines that are being shared about this certain topic.
And the coverage was framed around that too. It wasn't so much the act of the 6-day work week that it was framed with that, like, well, this is what they said, and there was a tweet that went out directly referencing that previous. And I feel like with that kind of thing where there's so much nuance and so much context that is missing in a 140 character tweet, it's dangerous, especially when you have people that don't like to click on articles. They like to knee-jerk reaction based off of a headline. And if these headlines only say part of the story, that's something that I've seen a lot of developers go after journalists of, like, hey, your story is wrong. Like, I was there, you were not. Like, don't speak, you're advocate for us, but don't speak over us. And I worry that that's happening a lot here.
So the reaction to this GameInformer reporting is, as I said earlier, divisive. You have people finding it very, very hard to believe that CD Projekt Red developers would be in support of crunching for Cyberpunk 2077, although I definitely feel like I can envision a lot of developers being in support of just working an extra day to get the game out on time at this point, since it's already been delayed twice. But the other opinion is that a lot of people are just going after Jason Schreier, accusing him of agenda-based reporting, and there's lots of that, but here are some of the reactions that I have gotten from people that work in the video game industry. We have one popular streamer, T-Rex, saying, as someone who has followed Jason's reporting for years, he absolutely has an agenda. Patterns of behavior really shows that. I completely agree with Paris here. We'll get to Paris in a second, because he actually got kind of attacked by Jason Schreier the other day. Anyway, Nick Calandra, who's the editor-in-chief of Escapist magazine, said, well, now I'm going to say the quiet part out loud. Schreier is toxic for all the good reporting he does. If you get another angle on his story or have a critique of him, he sends his followers to dogpile you and paint you as not credible. Only he is credible according to him. And then he further says, I've heard enough stories over the years and seen how he treats people in the industry to feel fine putting this out there. And then we have Colin Moriarty. He said, wait, you're telling me Jason Schreier wrote a flimsy, ideologically driven story about game labor? I can't believe that at all. Everyone at CDPR is really gonna hate their 5-figure bonuses for working 6 extra days. They're probably all crying as we speak. Obviously, that's sarcastic. And then Tony Polanco, he's another video game writer. He says, it's a shame some felt scared to celebrate their game going gold, but we know who to blame for that. Definitely, it seems like many are using this GameInformer reporting to go after Jason Schreier. But next we have Richard Hoaglaw. He responds to the editor-in-chief of Escapist magazine and what he says. He says that Nick goes nuclear. For the record, I agree and can attest to issues not just with Jason, but with others that have cautioned me, come after me, or told others not to work with me, all due to my critiques. Reasonable minds can differ. Time some folks remembered that. And then we actually have a former GameInformer editor, I believe, Mike Futter. He responded to this story by saying, seeing some people in the games media, which tends to suffer from its own terrible crunch, endorsing and apologizing for the crunch that goes on at some studios is uncomfortable, to say the least. If you wouldn't put it in print, do not say it on a podcast. And because I want to be clear about this, the stuff we discussed on our crunch episode of his show is in print. And then he continues, is all crunch created equal? Heck no. Are the crunch stories that make their way to the public typically bad? Often, because it isn't a week or two, it's 6 weeks, months, years. It causes physical and mental harm, and we need to be critical of it. One other thing, employees chose to crunch is still crunch. While there is a difference between explicit culture and implicit culture, the destination is the same. Convincing people to take one for the team is just a different path to the same ends. So those are some of the perspectives that are being shared on this report from GameInformer right now. But if you're not aware, Jason Schreier has been responding to criticism with his Bloomberg piece since it came out. But when Cyberpunk 2077 was announced to have gone gold, he tweeted out the following. He said, "Looking forward to playing this. Best wishes to all the exhausted devs still working long hours to fix as many bugs as they can by release day." And he got some criticism for this tweet, in which one of the most popular influencers with Cyberpunk 2077 Paris, he responded saying that crunch absolutely stinks, but it's almost like your agenda matters more than letting these same hardworking folks at CDPR have just one day to celebrate a huge achievement. Congrats. And then Jason Schreier blocked Paris, and then he tweeted out a few images saying, "It's disappointing but not entirely surprising to be accused of having an agenda by influencers who get free chairs from the companies involved." And that's the other image in this tweet. "My agenda is to report on the video game industry as fairly and honestly as I can and to not take swag from the companies I cover." And then again, from people within this video game industry, some would criticize Jason Schreier for this tweet, including somebody who works actually from IGN. But Paris did follow up and give a response to what Jason Schreier had said about him. He said it was disappointing but not surprising that he could not handle criticism. "You exposed crunch, we all agree it sucks, but you already won. You forced CDPR to respond, but your tweet today was simply you taking a victory lap and pushing your agenda while dripping with sarcasm." And for what it is worth, Jason Schreier said the reason why he has blocked Paris and why he was upset mainly with his tweet was him accusing him of having an agenda. And then the final tweet from Paris about this subject was that Jason Schreier failed to show me agreeing with him last week, but the fact remains his tweet today was petty and not needed. You got your flowers, but today also shows that you cannot handle feedback. Just overall disappointing. My apologies. Anyway, fast forward to now, Jason Schreier has again responded to criticism, and he wrote the following on Twitter, saying that a GameInformer podcast, the segment, the clips I just showed, recently suggested that my reporting on Cyberpunk 2077's crunch is incorrect. Never mind that I've interviewed nearly a dozen CDPR devs, here's an email from studio head Adam Badowski in June 2020 apologizing to the devs' partners for all the overtime. And I'm only going to read part of this statement, but you all have it on the screen, in which Adam Badowski in June said, "If I could wish for anything, I would like to humbly ask you to endure in the effort to deliver the game. I would also like to extend an apology to your partners and ask for their support as well. Dear partners, I am fully aware that the hard work of your loved ones often means they cannot participate on the home front, but I promise this is the last stretch and the finish line is near." And for what it's worth, when I shared the GameInformer segment on Twitter, this is actually what Jason Schreier responded to my tweet with. He said, "This is nonsense, you want proof," and he said, "This is the proof." But Jason Schreier did have an additional follow-up tweet in which he said, "A company embracing crunch culture doesn't make it evil or malicious or an industry villain, but I've never seen so many people jumping through hoops to try to deny or underplay reality the way they're doing for CD Projekt Red in Cyberpunk 2077. Now, following Jason Schreier's tweets in which he pretty much disputed what GameInformer was claiming, GameInformer's Liana Rupert did respond in Twitter with a few tweets. She said, "Again, the context not there in the tweet. This is why I don't do a lot of takes on Twitter. Too much nuance gets shelved, too much context gets lost. This is so disappointing to see." And then she added, "I've never seen someone jump through as many as you do when looking to misrepresent situations. You know exactly how you worded this tweet, and you know it doesn't align with what was said. Not sure when you become a bully, but it's a real shame because you are so incredible." Then she also said, "I don't even care. He knows what he's doing. I called out no outlets, no specific coverage, only talked about that a tweet started a larger conversation." I believe it was his. And it did, and that a lot of the reaction coverage didn't show the whole story. "I also say repeatedly, I'm not defending crunch." And then to another tweet in which people are calling her a liar, she said, "I have no reason to lie. It's all in the video. You're aggressive, and I am not going to feed into that. I said what I said. I've had several developers reach out to me since it aired thanking me for saying their side. I'm content with my contribution to the conversation. Have a good weekend." And then in another tweet she says, "Thank you for sending your mob after me again. I love being told to off myself 50 times before my morning coffee is done. It's great. I love it. Thank you." And then there's a couple of people that called her out and were tweeting at her, and she responded with the final tweet that I'll bring up. She says, "The podcast before the tweet, positive comments, thank yous from developers in and out of CDPR, open for conversation. His tweet is misleading, making it look personal and that I called him out. His massive following took that and ran with it. It's irresponsible. I also reached out in DM, which I always do when I feel like Jason feels in his original post, in order to keep keep the convo productive and private, and nothing. Anyway, to finally wrap up my thoughts on this story, which has really been kind of blowing up the last number of days, and it's really not slowing down, my perspective really hasn't changed. I do think that this crunch story has been blown out of proportions, and what GameInformer is reporting, I do think it is true. I don't think she's just making this up, which some are accusing her of. I think both can be true, that there are some people inside of CDPR that are upset, and then there are some that are not. This is a complicated, very complex story. It's very gray, and there's no way really of knowing the entire perspective of CD Projekt Red and all of the developers. All we know is that Bloomberg and GameInformer has spoken to maybe a few dozen developers on Cyberpunk 2077, but there are 1,000 people working on this game, and there's no way of knowing how every single person feels about the decision making that is coming down from management. All we know is, thanks to Bloomberg, some obviously are unhappy and not supportive, and then via GameInformer it seems like there is a large amount of developers that are okay with what's happening. But I also think that it's very interesting that there just wasn't any reporting at all about apparently there being active discussions within CDPR to possibly delay the game, but the massive majority of developers apparently agreed not to, and they were okay with putting in the extra time. And of course, some of that is influenced by the financial implications, as CD Projekt Red shares 10% of profits with employees every single year, and right now it's projected that they're going to make around $500 million, which means that out of the 1,000 employees, each employee is probably going to get around $50,000. So yeah, that's a pretty big incentive. I think that's just a very important detail about this whole story that was missing, and apparently Jason Schreier, I guess he claims that he never asked about it, so maybe we'll hear something about that in the future, but for now, I would not be surprised that Jason Schreier drops a huge Cyberpunk 2077 expose days before or after launch. It just kind of seems like that's on the horizon, and I have to say that I actually am very surprised by the amount of game people and games journalists that are actually calling Jason Schreier out for what's happening with this entire situation. I didn't realize how many really do not like Jason, but anyway, that is the entire situation right now. It's still blowing up. There could be more updates, but for now, just like I said at the beginning of the video, it's just a giant mess. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on everything that we did discuss down in the comments section below, but thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video or if you found any informative value, and make sure to follow my other social media accounts for updates on new videos. Links are always down in the description below. I'm most active on Twitter, giving opinions on news that I do not always get into video form, so do make sure to follow me over there. Also check out my Discord for all sorts of discussion on games, and again, thank you for joining. Consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.